to talk about monitoring and why monitoring is important, the tools that we would use to do it for a system and for an entire network, and then what an audit is and how we interpret those audits. So when we talk about monitoring technologies and methodologies, there's 3 different kinds. The first is a signature-based monitoring. So it's looking at the frames, the packets of traffic, and it's trying to scan those for a predetermined attack pattern. That's also known as a signature. So a great example of that is antivirus. So the definitions that it keeps downloading all the time are the signatures for new known viruses. So if the AV can detect it, then it can block it. And that's how it detects it, is it says, well, we already know this is a virus. We found this in the packet, so we know that it's a match and block it. The anomaly-based monitoring gives a baseline, and if there's any deviation from that baseline, then it will try to detect and let you know that. So the problem with that being, if the baseline is wrong, then all your monitoring is flawed. So it kind of depends on the circumstance. But an intrusion detection system or an intrusion prevention system, protection system, I always get that backwards, is the kind of thing that would constitute as anomaly-based monitoring. Behavior-based monitoring looks at previous behavior, so it's kind of, you would almost consider that kind of a heuristic approach. It looks back at the previous behavior of things, and if there's some kind of deviation from that, then it will pop up and let you know about that. The IPS and the IDS do that as well. So if the application behaves improperly, the monitoring system is going to try to stop that behavior. So if, for example, you have a program that's trying to execute a command prompt and it does not normally do that, maybe it's trying to put commands into it to make the computer do something. For example, if they're trying to use commands to copy files into another user profile, which is an example of like a horizontal privilege escalation, it would pop up and go, well, no, we're not supposed to normally use command prompts to try to do that. We had an example back in the ITSY1342 class about someone doing that. So that's behavior. It understands that it's not supposed to normally do that kind of behavior. Tools that we would use to monitor baselining. I love to ask questions about baselining and Security Plus. That is measuring a change. So that can be in the actions of the network and hardware or in software. And one of the ways we do that is we go to Task Manager and we look to see what kind of processes are using what. So if we go to that and go to the Performance tab, then we can get some graphs that give us, this is the usage of the CPU and the memory and things like that. If you have a rootkit or something, it's possible that it may be pegging out one of these graphs all the time. So that's one way that you can see what's happening. Baselining can be done on a new computer or a new server out of the box. You can also use that graph to say, especially on a server, hey, if the memory is always topped out all the time, it's time to add more memory. We can select something to measure as part of our baseline, and then measure it for a period of time, maybe a day, a week, a month, and kind of see what patterns we can see. Protocol analyzers we've used before, Wireshark being one, and then Network Monitor, that's what you would use on a Windows Server environment. We'll do a lab about that on Thursday. Promiscuous mode is when the adapter catches all the packets as destined for everyone, not just it. And then non-promiscuous mode is when it's only capturing packets that it's specifically been addressed to it. A broadcast storm is something that can happen. It's not necessarily kind of attack. You could generate it as kind of attack, but it's a bunch of broadcast, multicast packet that comes over an interface, and it can be kind of a form of denial of service because it can make things shut down. So the TCP/IP handshake, where we're doing the synchronization requests and the acknowledge requests, if we have a whole bunch of those happening, it might cause a broadcast storm. SNMP, or Simple Network Management Protocol. is a protocol that lets us monitor devices and computers. It uses port 161 and 162. 161 is the big one. I think 162 is just how it sends messages out. And there's a couple different things you need to be able to have that. You have to have the device. The stuff that you put on the device is the agent. So that's the thing that sends the messages to the network management system. There's a few different versions of SNMP. The most recent one's SNMP version 3. It's got some security and things like that to it. So if you want to know what kind of information SNMP can give you, I've got an example up here. So this is the software that we use at our shop to do this. So you can kind of get a quick status of whatever the location is. So in this case, this was for Longview Computer Center. We have 33 devices. Everything is up. There's 7 that are down. That could just mean they're turned off. And we don't really watch our alerts. We watch them for the people that pay for the service. But you can see kind of the devices, how many printers, mobile devices, what the contact information is. As you go through the screens, you can see, for example, here's all of the active computers. If you click right here, you RDP into them. That's cool. So you can see who the last person to log in was, what their IP address is, what the operating system is, how many hours they've been up or down. So you can see how that information would be neat. You need to know. So now I've gone into a specific device, which you can see right there. So you can see all the information, the description, the operating system, details about it, what service pack is installed, the date that it was found on the network. You can even put in warranty information. Some of that will populate on its own. That's cool. If you want to look at alerts, this is the thing that SNMP is really, really good at. So, or good for. You could, a lot of these alerts, they're not necessarily something you can create a ticket for. Maybe Windows Update failed, but then the next day it tries again and is successful. But there could be things like an IP address conflict. That could be a pretty big deal on a network. It can get as specific as saying, the operating system tried to write to a sector of the hard drive and then failed. So that would let you know that possibly that hard drive is going bad. It might be something you want to replace. If you have thresholds set up for things like the CPU temperature or the memory usage, it can give you an alert to let you know when it hits that threshold. So that can kind of keep your network running efficiently, keep the computers running efficiently. You can even drill down into the individual stuff on the network and see what memory, how many slots, even which slot, what kind of memory is in. So that is amazing, especially when you're trying to upgrade an entire office's memory. Instead of going on site and then opening up the computer and picking around in it and figuring these things out. You just have the information right there. Even down to what kind of NICs and optical drives in it, video cards. You can get a list of all the software that's installed on the computer, when it was installed, what version. So there's lots and lots of things that SNMP can do for us that can help us as technicians.
So say I had SNMP on my laptop and wanted to hack into someone's network. Could you use SNMP to help you, to assist you in doing that? Like for instance, like you showed up there, it shows what applications and stuff are installed. Say you have a program that'll crack through JavaScript.
Right.
If you use SNMP and you see that their job or something's not up to date, could you then?
You could. The thing is with this report, like we have agents installed on all the computers in the office to report this back to us. You would have to have access to that reporting.
Oh, okay.
So SNMP is a protocol. It's not the service that's going to give you the information.
Gotcha.
So you have to have that too. So yeah, if you were a disgruntled employee and you wanted to mess something up,
Yeah.
sure, you certainly could.
Okay.
But especially since you know everything's IP address and the last user that was on it, maybe you could guess their password. Yeah, definitely. Another cool thing that I found to be helpful is the shared folders feature. So if you go to computer management, so you can just go to the run menu, go to run and then compmgmt.msc. Over here. It's kind of fussing me about admin things. It gives you a list of all the sessions and all the things that have been shared out from the computer that you're on. So, right here, shared folders. And I'm gonna have some in this case, like the E drive, we know that's shared out because we use it all the time. So I've got the information about it, and I can say how many people are connected to it, anything like that. So that's cool. I can also just stop sharing out that folder from this window if I want to. Another thing that's neat is how many sessions are open. I don't have any sessions open right now, but if y'all were to click on the E drive and access that, I believe that we would have sessions to look at. If I have a whole bunch of people connected and I want to kick them off, I can just right click in that window and say disconnect all sessions. And then they don't have access to whatever they're doing on my computer right now. And then you've got open files. So if you were to open up something on the E drive, because it's shared, I will be able to see that, and I could disconnect you from that file. So there's some neat things in there. A lot of times with networks, you have people that go in and out, their jobs change, and you kind of lose track of what's shared to who. And that's where privileges get beyond the realm of what they need to do their job. So that is a quick place to go in and look if you've got something that acts as a file server or something, to go in and look and kind of check those permissions. Okay, who has access to what's shared to who. So that's an easy place to do that. Another way that you can do that, if you want to see the local files, you can open up command prompt. Oh, you have to do it in administrator mode, which is just to right click on it and say run as administrator. If you do that and you type open files space / local space on, it's going to open up the ability to see those files. Then you have to restart the computer to make it come into effect. That will do it. So it just tells me that, okay, that's been enabled. Restart and you'll be able to see those open files. Several things use the net command. So you can use net file, net config, net session, net view to do a lot of the same things we just did in that GUI environment. Net stat, we know from Network Plus, shows all the current sessions that are happening on your computer, who they're established with. And in Linux, that's netstat, the same, and LSOF, which is apparently short for list open files. I just learned that.
I thought that was really interesting when I showed you the chapter, because it showed the little thing and it showed the, I guess it's like the command line or something, and it just list open files and it just popped a big old list of everything. So.
Yeah. Security audits are assessments that we make of our applications, of our systems, of our networks. We have to turn on that auditing policy. It's not automatically on, but we can turn it on and then we can enable it for a specific file, a specific folder, or maybe something like a printer, a network device like that. Then when something happens, we have logs we can go back to and say, okay, who did what to what resource and when? So hopefully we've got our time, date stamps, and everything are synced up, and those logs have integrity. So if something does happen or get accidentally deleted or moved or something, we can go back and figure out who did it. There's a few different kinds of Windows log files, which we've got a little video on those. Another thing that I want y'all to know about is syslog, because that's another thing that's a great question to ask on Security Plus.
And this information will be very valuable for us to use, not only for what we're doing internally, but also for making plans for the future. One of the challenges, of course, is that there are a lot of logs, so it takes some very specialized devices and technologies to be able to collect all of those logs, to parse through them and store them, and then ultimately to provide us with reports and information from what we've gathered over such a very large area. We'll generally find different categorizations of logs, things like event logs and auditing logs and security logs, and each one of those log types provides us with a different kind of information that we could use for different scenarios. There's many options for automating the collection and the reporting of this log data, and you can find many open source and commercial packages that can collect all of this information, parse through it, and be able to provide you with some actionable data that you can use in your business. An event log tells us anytime something happens on the network. These are usually very normal operations. Someone logs into the network, someone opens a file is copied from one server to another. These types of situations are relatively innocuous. This is the normal operation of what's happening. We're simply logging every time one of these events occurs. This might be useful to use though after the fact. If we're trying to determine how did this file get transferred from one place to the other, we might have an event log that shows us exactly that information. And as it sounds, every time you store this information, you're collecting a larger and larger and larger log file. Event logs can be very large. And so you want to be sure that if you're planning to collect these, that you have plenty of storage set aside to collect as much information as you need. You may be gathering these logs from many different places. They can come from your routers and your firewalls and your switches and your servers. All of this is used to ultimately, after the fact, determine what happened on your network. And if you have a security event, these event logs will be very, very useful to help understand what happened before all of the alarms went off. An audit log is very similar to an event log, but an audit log is only going to tell us when things change. And usually these are things that are very important for us to be able to watch, and so that later on we can go back and see who made that change, what type of change was it, what time of the day did that change occur. These audit logs might tell us when absolutely legitimate activity might be going on. If we're planning to make some firewall changes, the audit logs will be able to determine who made the changes and why they made them. These audit logs can also tell us when unapproved activity has occurred. If suddenly our log shows that a change was made to the firewall, yet nobody has any paperwork or any knowledge that any change was to be made, and you've got a problem. And that's where you may be able to find someone who's making unapproved changes, all from the information you're gathering from your audit logs. You're not going to get quite as many audit logs as you have event logs, but in a way your audit logs are almost more important, because we're looking for very specific changes to occur in very specific places. And generally, these types of logs have very critical information inside of them. As the name implies, an access log is going to tell us when somebody gains access to a resource. They may be gaining access to a file server. Perhaps they're logging in to use a VPN. There's going to be a log somewhere that tells us that that particular event occurred. This can come from web servers, which have their own set of access logs inside of them. There could be VPN concentrators. There could be applications that store log information when somebody logs into the application and gains access to certain types of data. This can be very useful to tell who's gaining access, to make sure that people are getting the access they require from their resources, but it can also tell us who's not getting access to those resources. If somebody's constantly trying the same username but the wrong password to access a VPN, and they're doing it over and over and over again, you'll see that information in your access log. This way you can start to limit the attack vectors available to you. If somebody's trying to gain access to your web server and they're constantly trying to authenticate, and your access log shows that they've been denied access constantly over and over, you can create automation that might block that IP address or limit access from that particular IP address, or slow down the process for them to make it very frustrating for what they're doing, or maybe you lock them out completely so that nobody can log in with that particular username any longer. If you're going back and trying to rebuild what happened during an attack, what did we see change, when did the bad guys gain access to a particular resource, all of that information is going to be inside of your access logs. as a security professional, you're going to be looking through a lot of security logs. These are very focused logs, and they generally focus on very specific events that are occurring that are important from a security perspective. Usually the file server team and the router team aren't necessarily interested in the security related events. They may be more interested in the performance related events. So you'll find that you'll get security logs from all kinds of different places. They'll generally come from your security devices like your firewalls or your VPN concentrators or your IPS systems. These types of logs can tell us a lot about the security of our system, so it's very useful to be able to monitor these security logs over time. There can sometimes be a completely separate logging system for the security team, especially since the information that the security team needs is so different than other parts of the organization. You might have a file server team that has a file server log collector. They're collecting performance information and availability for their file servers. You may instead create an entirely separate system just to gather security logs from those file servers. This not only is going to allow you to manage your own set of data, but it's going to allow you to find just the security pieces that are important to you and ensure that all of that data is being collected.
So our security log gives us audit information, log on events, and who access different kinds of objects. Our system log may give us a shutdown message every time the system shut down. When there's a blue screen, that's a really good place to go troubleshoot blue screen errors. And if a driver has failed, that might be helpful. The application log is going to be for the operating system stuff and any third-party programs that are installed. Now syslog is a standard. It's not a log named syslog, but it's a standard for how that information is logged. What syslog is used for is you can export all the logs. So you've got all these different things giving you log information. It's not like you're going to sit down once a week and spend an entire day going through all these logs to try to figure out if something's happened that you need to fix. So using the syslog standard, you can maybe have a syslog server where all these things talk to and export that data into it. And then you can look at all that stuff in one screen instead of trying to go to each individual device and view its log, because that would be awful. And syslog, because it's a protocol, it has a port, right? So that port is 514. You ever come across that port? When we talk about creating log files, a lot of the considerations that we might have to think about can come from some federal or some industry regulation. So, healthcare logs may have to look different than bank logs. So there's some variation there. So some of the considerations, are they stored in multiple locations? If they're not stored in multiple locations, what could that mean? If I have a syslog server and everything goes to the syslog server and that's the only place it goes.
If that goes down, the entire log is lost.
If that goes down, all your logs are lost. Exactly. Were the logs encrypted? So they need to be encrypted in transit to wherever the server is, if you have a syslog server, just to make sure. When you think about the SNMP and all the information we saw in that, if there was some kind of integration in the logs with that, you could find out a lot of information about somebody's network with that. So we definitely don't want that to happen. Were they hashed for integrity? So hashing is what we do to make sure that files weren't changed or damaged in transit. We'll talk more about that, I think, when we get to chapter 14. Was verbose logging enabled? So you have logs that don't have a lot of information. If you have verbose logging enabled, it's a whole lot more. Of course, if you've got a whole lot more, you're going to need more space for it. Has time stamping been incorporated? Logs don't make any difference to us at all if the time's not correct. The time is the entire point, right? So that has to be done. And then what's the size limit of the files? So it can be set in different ways. So if the file reaches this much capacity, let's say it's 10 megs or something. If it reaches 10 megs, it starts overwriting older things. Or it can say break off and start a new file. If we have to keep a year's worth of logging data, we might have to break off and make another file because the restriction is only 10 megs and that's not enough. I can tell you from experience that sometimes if you have log files and they get too large, they can cause corruption in the system, because that happened to us once with Citrix running a VM, server VM. The log file became too great and the server wouldn't start up, and it was bad. Well, once you figure that out, that's fine, but a lot of times if you're not paying attention and you just go by whatever the default log size is, that kind of thing can happen. As far as maintenance and security goes, if you look at the log properties of a file in Windows, you're going to see the created, the modified, the access, and all those things. You can see down here where it says enable logging and then minimum or maximum log size file, and then you can set that to be larger if you need to be. And then we've got our options. Override events as needed, oldest events first. Archive the log when full, do not overwrite events. And then just don't override events ever and clear out the logs manually. So then you can have lots and lots and lots of logs that build over time. But depending on the regulation in the industry, that might be what's required.
What's the general, like, just kind of go to with the standard?
I mean, I've seen
Like, do people keep
1
logs
month.
from, okay. Was like, do people keep logs from like years and years ago?
I think some, for some federal regulations.
They have to? That's what I mean.
Especially, what is it, Sarbanes-Oxley? For banking, like federal
Oh,
banks?
yeah.
Yeah, they'll have to keep it forever.
I would think they would keep them for like 5 years.